All right, it is noon. We will get started. For those of you just joining us, this meeting is recorded. I hope that is okay. This will be very helpful for those that will be missing this opportunity to have a conversation with us about Proposition 123. Before we get started, I wanted to thank a few people. Luke Teeter with Thrive Economics has been an awesome partner, along with Gary Community Ventures, in helping us really understand Proposition 123. I guess we should take a step backwards. They did a great job of making Proposition 123 happen in the first place. And of course, getting us to understand all the moving parts of Proposition 123, working together to articulate it in such a way that it makes sense to everybody, hopefully. And of course, I would also like to thank OEDIT and their partnership working through 123, and of course, CHAFA, its partnership, and last but not least, the Division of Local Government and its partnership. These have all these folks have been our implementation partners through this whole journey, which is just really getting started, more to follow. And of course, there are other people we're pulling in as well and other groups to help us make this as an effective implementation as possible. So thank you all. And thank you guys for joining us today. All right. So we've got a pretty aggressive agenda laid out for this afternoon. And so we're going to be very conscious of time and try to move this as quickly as possible. Really appreciate you guys registering and providing your questions and comments and concerns ahead of time. That was really helpful in us packaging this meeting today. But of course, we're not going to be able to get to everything. That's just the reality. And some things are actually best addressed in opportunities that we're going to be talking about downstream here. So keep, hold tight to those questions, comments, and suggestions. They will get addressed at some point in time, if not today, but hopefully we can get to the bulk of what you shared in today's forum. As you can see from the agenda here, we're going to be walking through a variety of items, but the bulk of this is focused on the baselines. Okay, so local government understanding and being able to determine its own baseline. And we'll be walking through with you how we can help you with that, but ultimately it's your decision to make. And then we'll be also talking about a few other items, but they're all going to be mostly, like I said, related to the baseline and the commitment piece. Sorry. So understanding those two working pieces: baseline, what it is, how do I go about establishing it, and then how do I go about achieving a successful commitment. We will also touch upon a few other items, but those are not going to be the focus of today's presentation, the fast track being one of them, the actual funding programs that CHAFA and OEDIT will be administering, and as well as the ones that we're administering. And there's going to be more information about more engaged or involved engagement workshops on those specific pieces as well. So we'll try to touch upon everything to an extent, but the vast majority of time will be spent on the baseline and the commitment piece. So I hope everybody's understanding. So when you look at this slide here, particularly when you see a number followed by a C, that's just an idea of how much time we're going to spend roughly on content. And then, of course, we're going to open it up for Q&A, questions and answers afterwards. Some don't have that. That just means we're just going to bang through some content just to give you an understanding. And then these other areas are areas we've identified that are ripe for some serious dialogue. With that being said, there are some quick ground rules to cover. One is, if you're on the phone, and I can't see everybody right now because I'm presenting, but if you're on the phone, you need to hit *6 to mute or unmute yourself. Please keep yourself muted for now. But if you want us to recognize you to be able to speak, you then need to click on *9 to raise your hand. And we have folks that are monitoring that, okay? So when you see that opportunity come up for dialogue and you are on the phone, *9 to raise your hand, and of course to lower it when you're done, and then *6 to unmute yourself and then mute yourself again. And for those of you on the computer, much simpler. There's actually an icon to raise and lower your hand. Keep yourself muted. If you're on multiple devices, please mute one of them. That way we can limit disruption of background noise. And of course, if you're not speaking, please keep yourself muted. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? And then regarding chats, we have a chat feature on here, but we would really prefer if we limit the chats as much as possible. We do have some folks that will be monitoring and responding to chats if needed. But our preference would be if you would like to speak, that you do so verbally, since some participants are not on their computer. They're actually participating via phone. And I'm sure would love to hear that dialogue. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. All right, we shall move along. So this is just, the next few slides are just really high level slides capturing Proposition 123. It's almost 21 pages long. Or actually it is almost 22 pages long, I should say. And I'm not gonna go through everything in full detail, but the beauty about it is it provides funding for affordable housing, right? This is a mechanism to do so. And it's divided as such on this slide. Division Housing, DOLA Division Housing will be getting 40% of these funds. This is what is estimated to be. First year is a partial year, right? So from January 1st of this year through June 30th of this year. So that's half our fiscal year. And then the next fiscal year is a full fiscal year. And 40% for the programs that we are charged with through Proposition 123, 60% for the programs that OEDIT is charged with through Proposition 123. And then of course, OEDIT is partnering up with CHAFA to be administering its programs. We'll get into more detail about that later on, but this is just a high level overview of the funding and who's doing what, so folks understand. Sorry, my controls are a little slow. So the biggest piece, but of course, everything, the programs that we're talking about in that funding, which is fantastic, none of that happens without the baseline and the commitment piece being figured out, right? And so these are the deadlines that are provided in 123 for a locality, a municipality or a county for the unincorporated parts to get their commitments done by. So the first cycle that we're looking at, the upcoming cycle, those commitments have to be finalized by November 1st of this year. So we don't have much time, and that's what we're working towards, and that's why we're having this meeting, especially as a follow-up to the one hosted by Gary several months ago. And then subsequently after that, so each cycle is 3 years, we're looking at November 1st of the following cycle. These commitments are due by then. And those commitments, of course, are to increase the affordable housing stock in that jurisdiction. And as outlined in Proposition 123, we're talking about 3% a year, right? But that's based off of determining first and foremost what that baseline affordable housing actually is. And Proposition 123 lays out basically 3 pathways for that, right? One is the ACS, one is the CHAZ, and one is something else that we come up with, right? Connor is going to go into a lot more detail about all of this in his part of the presentation. But just so you know, these are the fundamental building blocks laid out by Proposition 123 that we have to stay within, in addition to, of course, defining what affordable housing actually means, right? So if you have not had a chance to ground yourself in 123, I would suggest you do so, because that is our starting point. Now, we are going through a legislative process. There is potentiality for some of that to change through this legislative process, but we're proceeding as it's currently written because of timing, right? November 1st is around the corner, and we want to make sure that our part of it is done effectively, so you guys, local governments, can make informed decisions on how to go about proceeding with achieving, establishing your baseline numbers, and of course, ultimately achieving your commitments. All right, so with those options that were laid out, there's also some additional flexibility in Proposition 123. There's a petition process. So if a locality, and you hopefully have seen the baseline numbers that we provided, and just once again, Connor will go into more detail about this, but those are not something you have to accept, right? Ultimately, a local government is to determine its own baseline number of affordable housing, right? what we've done is a starting point to give you an idea of what that looks like. And Connor will go into greater detail about how we did that, right? But within that, there's also some flexibility, right? If your baseline number, whether you came up with it yourself or we did it for you, doesn't suit your needs for whatever reason, there's also options in 123 where you can utilize a neighboring county's AMI, right, to achieve the baseline number that suits your needs, or you can utilize the state median household income, all right? And there's a petition process for that, and Connor will walk through how to go about doing that. And as mentioned earlier, ultimately what we're trying to achieve is a commitment for 3% growth on that number, right, each year for 9% for a 3-year cycle. And I'll talk later on in this presentation about what compliance looks like, but these slides that we just talked about are just broad brushstrokes at a high level about what Proposition 123 has laid out for us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Connor, and he will share his screen and go through the next 3 sections with you guys. Now you just got to stop sharing.
Yeah, let me just set this up briefly. Okay, Mo, can you see that okay?
I can.
Okay, perfect. Let me start the stopwatch so that we can field questions. So I want to spend the first few minutes here before jumping into the details, really just kind of refreshing the concept of how are these affordable housing baselines determined? And how we really like to look at this over at the state is like this pyramid here, because each different component of the proposition builds upon each other. So there's a lot of subtlety, and some aspects of this, like what does it mean for housing to be affordable, might be different than some folks are used to, especially if you come from the HUD subsidized affordable housing space. So the really first part to start with when you really want to determine the baseline amount of affordable housing for a municipality or an unincorporated area is by selecting a median income. So if you do come from a HUD or a subsidized background, you'll already be familiar with area median incomes. These are published by HUD on an annual basis. And most folks are likely familiar with these area median incomes for your own county. For households ranging of the size of 1 to 8. So that is just one of the 3 options for median incomes that are available in the proposition. Localities can alternatively select the area median income, not of their own jurisdiction, but of an adjacent one. And then the third option is using the state household median income, as opposed to the area median income, which is set at either the county or the metropolitan statistical area levels. But this is the most important and the first part of determining your baseline, because it's this median income at the bottom of the pyramid that determines the income limits that affordable housing is affordable to. So on the renter side, that's up to 60% of that median income, and the homeownership side is over at 100%. Once this is determined, and you know what is the income limit that housing is affordable to, then you can determine the max rent and the max prices of affordable housing that folks can afford. whether it's on the subsidized market, naturally occurring, unsubsidized. It's this max affordability level at 30% of the household's income that feeds into determining whether a unit is affordable or not, and therefore becomes included in the baseline amount of affordable housing. And this is the exact method that our team used in creating our completely non-binding, just for the sake of reference, baseline estimates, so that localities and other stakeholders can get this initial feel and provide some feedback on what these baselines could look like. So this is what has already been done, and as Mo is saying, this can be done with multiple data sources, and the most flexible of those is the American Community Survey from the US Census Bureau. And what's a little less flexible, but could be easier for some situations, is the Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy data from HUD. And just a little sneak peek for you all, when we're talking about baselines, we know that this pyramid and the process is fairly complicated. And we've already received a lot of feedback from you all that you want to know more about methods. You want to know more about how can you determine your own baseline. And that is the next step for us. Our team and our statistical analyst, Ben Madelon, has been working very hard on the next iteration of this baseline design work. And that next iteration will involve a self-service, intuitive data analysis tool that you all and other stakeholders can use on the web to develop your own baselines by selecting your own county, your own years, choosing variables, and really making this baseline reflect your local, your current conditions. So we are really grateful for the feedback that we received so far on that non-binding spreadsheet, and we will be publishing additional materials in the coming weeks for even more feedback so that we can be as helpful for you all as possible. And I think that I'm ready for questions. Is there anything on the chat or anyone that has a hand raise?
There are quite a few on the chat.
I just need to reopen that with all the windows having been moved around.
I know. I don't see any hands raised though, but you do have a question. I can read them to you too, Connor. One is, I'll just start. I probably should not start from the bottom actually, because they're populating as we're talking. But then I'll go in the top. We have several people asking about recording. So let me get to it. And then somebody had difficulty. Okay, 30% is supposed to count towards utilities too. Is there a value that can be used to provide a better calculation of this affordable value?
This is regarding the utilities specifically, right?
Seems to be the 30% of the affordable housing definition, where it can't be cost more than 30% of their income. I guess is applying to that.
Yeah. So any other state or Gary folks, let me know if my memory is getting past me. As I recall the statute, housing units are considered as affordable for rental units if the rent itself, not the utilities or any other expenses, is less than 30% of income. And on the homeownership side, it's if the mortgage is 30% or less of the household income at that income limit towards the middle of the pyramid. So I believe that for this purpose, utilities do not factor in other types of fees or like HOA costs. Property tax is not included either.
Luke, you see it the same way?
Yes, I think that's right. And just to clarify a little bit more, from some of the questions I'm seeing in the chat, just to want to kind of benchmark a little bit early here that these definitions at 60% AMI for rentals and 100% AMI for ownership units is just for the purposes of calculating the baseline. For the actual eligibility for the programs, those have other thresholds that I believe we'll be touching on maybe towards the end of this meeting today, but certainly in the upcoming stakeholder meetings that we have as well. But yeah, just to clarify that 60% and 100% that we're talking about right now are just for the purposes of calculating the baselines.
Great, thank you, Luke. Thank you, Connor. I guess it's sort of a follow-up. Somebody asked the home buyer income limits established in Proposition 123. Basically, 100% is very limiting. 60% for renter income. So basically, they don't think it's they're high enough. I assume for not establishing the actual baseline, but actual what you were talking about. So do you want to expand upon that further? They're asking us flexibility and about how to apply those limitations to, I guess, their community needs.
Sure. And I think that's ultimately a question that we can get into more when we're talking about the programs that are established by the measure. But I think maybe just one thing I'd emphasize quickly, though, is that most of the AMIs used in the measure on the program side and the kind of eligibility, or on the funding eligibility side, are averages rather than caps. So it's required, for example, for the equity financing program, that the projects be at an average of 90% AMI or less. But I do think that's a little bit separate from the topic we're talking about now, which is just what is that baseline that sets the 3% target that you have to hit over a 3-year period.
Perfect. Thank you, Luke. The interactive tool sounds very helpful. Will be available before November 1st. The answer is yes. We actually have it ready to roll out. Just didn't have an opportunity to share it before today's meeting, but you will be seeing it in the near future. Great question, Steve. What other data besides ACS did you use to determine that baseline? We covered that, but Connor, do you want to recap that real quick?
Yeah, and this relates to some similar questions from Commissioner Pogue and Director Kermode. The ACS was really the only source of data, but there was some adjustment performed with those figures. One of the adjustment portions is on the home buyer assumptions and what value of home can folks afford to buy. Because that ACS data is from roughly 2019, we used a home price to income ratio of 3.5, which could be generous given the recent inflation levels. And that's something that localities could choose to revise downwards. And that's something that is being incorporated into our tool that's not being released today on engagement, but the data analysis tool that's being released in coming weeks, where folks will be able to choose their own home value to income ratio based on the current economic environment. Another parameter that we used was on the home ownership side, we accounted for turnover in housing stock because, just because there's a bunch of homes available under, for example, $300,000 that could be considered affordable, it doesn't mean that they're going up for sale now or in the foreseeable future. So that was also prorated based on the American Community Survey data of recent movers. For folks that want to dive into this data themselves before this interactive tool is released, you'll be able to visit our engagement website that we'll be detailing after this, to look at the references in the individual tables that were used to produce that data on the Census Bureau's website with links.
Thank you for that, Connor. And you just remind me, I was talking about the engagement website, not the interactive tool. That will be coming out later. The engagement website will be coming out sooner. Apologies for the mix-up on my part. Somebody did ask actually, before I get into more questions, I see more chats coming along. Some folks may have joined later. It's our preference, if possible, since I think would just help, especially since sometimes it's not clear exactly how you've phrased your question. It'd be helpful if you could actually raise your hand and be willing to speak to your question so we can make sure we're actually hearing and understanding it correctly. And then that way, the folks that are not on their computers can also hear it the way you want it presented when we work towards answering it. So if you don't mind doing that, that'd be very helpful. We'll of course continue doing it this way, but it would make things a lot smoother if we could try it the other way, if you're okay with that. So Connor, the next one was calculation. Can the calculation be at the municipal level or do we have to stay at the county level?
I'm trying to think of how to answer this one. So the calculation, if we're talking about the baseline itself, it would be if you are a locality and you want to determine a baseline, it's our understanding that for municipalities, your baseline is only about your own municipality. And if you are a county, it's about the unincorporated areas in your county. I don't think any kind of joint submission is prohibited, but it might be, it's potentially unintuitive with the compliance aspects that have to come later. If there are localities that would like to cooperate, then I think we definitely want to hear more about that as we move through the weeks here so that we could design some processes around that.
Great. And we do have some folks with their hands up, which is fantastic. So I'm going to start recognizing a few folks here. Perry.
Thank you for recognizing me. My question, I think, is pretty quick. Given that this is on a 3-year cycle, and we're entering a period, well, we've been in a period of high variability of mortgage interest rates. Is there anything built into the model to make adjustments? Because we may see rates go up and go down, and I wonder if in that baseline calculation, are we going to get stuck somewhere? If that question is clear.
Yeah, I wonder, Perry, if this is more from the process side, where if the market conditions change, maybe you'd want to submit a different baseline that reflects those changes.
Correct. Okay.
At least as far as what I've been thinking of the statute is that once the baseline is submitted, it's locked in until the end of that 3-year cycle and can't be revised. Anyone else on the state team or Gary team see it differently?
Connor, I think that's right. And Perry, I might be maybe misunderstanding your question, but from what I'm hearing, I think that my response would be that kind of the assumptions that you're making around mortgage rates and other kind of factors that go into affordability like that is something that is up to you as you calculate your baseline. I think Connor's had a great lift in pulling together all of these estimates for every community across the state, but that's also just kind of one way of doing it and kind of intended to be a starting point. So I certainly think kind of making other assumptions as far as interest rates and other things like that is certainly within the scope of what you could do.
Yeah, okay. I would agree though, from ensuring that it's not a moving target, that once you lock in and it's up to you to make the determination that it is for the 3-year cycle.
Okay, thank you for answering that. That does make sense. we all have to look at our own areas because obviously Colorado is pretty diverse in different communities because we have resort communities, et cetera. But yeah, that's something we'll have to think really carefully about. Thank you for answering my question.
Thank you, Barry. We have Catherine Alderman.
Hi, this is Kathy Alderman from Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. You mentioned that we're looking at ensuring households aren't spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And then you said that that number excluded utilities, but it has always included utilities in the past. So I'm just wondering if this is really a departure from that, or if that is actually, it does include utilities. And then the second question is, in terms of counties being able to use adjacent counties' AMIs, what kind of restrictions will be on that? Because I could see, for instance, where a county has, higher AMIs, their adjacent county has higher AMIs, and so they are building up to a population that actually may not live in their county, or might use it in a way to restrict the building of more deeply affordable housing by using an adjacent county's AMI levels. So those are my two questions.
So on the first question of the utilities, I do think that when you're looking at the baseline specifically and calculating this annual goal for increases in affordable housing, we're not really looking at cost burden. We're not looking at utilities. The statute explicitly reads that the baseline is determined based on the supply side, the units, not the demand side and households and cost burden. And it's based on these units and who they're affordable to, just based on the rent, just based on the mortgage.
And
I don't see much flexibility there.
sorry, Connor, to jump in there. I also want to make clear that this is just for the defining of the baseline, which is a 3-year baseline that local governments will be using to determine how much affordable housing they need to develop in order to qualify in the next 3-year period. Over that 3-year period, utilities are going to be super volatile and would be difficult to implement into the baseline. But the debt financing program, which is more akin to what normal, affordable housing financing programs look like, does take into account the cost of utilities when determining affordability. So this is for the baseline, meant to be more simple. That way local governments can set the baseline and then try to grow it. But once CHFA actually starts implementing the debt financing program, they will use utilities.
Got it. Thank you. Who was that talking? I can't see you on the screen.
Yeah, it's Zach Martinez. Sorry, I'm sick, so
Okay.
I don't want you guys all to have to watch me blow my nose like every 3 minutes.
That's perfectly fine. I just kept looking at people on the screen. I was like, I'm not seeing anybody's lips moving. This is really strange.
We appreciate that, Zach. Zach's with Gary, Kathy. And then you had a second question, though. So I don't know if Zach or Luke want to answer that question about utilizing a neighboring AMI that may not really fit a local jurisdiction's needs. The reality is this is all set up to allow a jurisdiction to determine its needs and not for us to micromanage that. But did you guys want to add anything further to that or address that further?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that. I think what we'll get to in a little bit here is looking at, some of the templates that DOLA has set up for people to provide their baselines. And, there is, local governments are going to have to kind of provide an explanation for why using a different jurisdiction's AMI would be a better match for their local needs. But within that, to Mo's point just now, I don't think there's any real appetite for kind of, especially on this first cycle, for holding a very high bar there or kind of requiring extensive proof or anything like that. I think we, are wanting local communities to be able to opt in and to be able to make and meet these commitments. And so, but that said, there is some justification required for how that better meets their needs.
Well said. Thank you for the great questions, Kathy. Jennifer Kermode, I hope I'm saying your name correctly.
Yes, you are. Thank you for that. I'm a housing consultant in the western part of Colorado, having previously worked for some local governments here directly in affordable housing. I am a little concerned about the baseline. And again, a lot of reliance on the ACS for rural areas in Colorado, because that's not real time, real place information for the most part. And then for implementation, I do get concerned about each jurisdiction, each county being able to determine what they use for their own affordability factors. And I'm just thinking about implementation and equity way down the road when people who are on the ground are actually trying to implement this. So some further information about how that baseline is going to be created, being made available is going to be quite helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Jennifer. Randy Clark.
Yes, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to ask questions. I do have a question regarding the comment on collaborative applications, specifically between county governments and local municipal governments. Down in Douglas County, we certainly would be interested in working with our municipal partners, and we feel that that is a good way to address the situations where we have large unincorporated areas, but also also a lot of incorporated areas, and working together may be the only way that we really have a chance to get to a 3% growth. And so in those situations, can you provide any direction or clarification on how we might approach a baseline if we were to work together in partnership?
Who wants to tackle that question? My understanding, and let me know if I'm wrong here, Luke, that the baseline is specific to the locality. But they can get together to work on projects across borders, but maybe I'm misunderstanding that. Thoughts on that?
Mo, that's exactly right. So the baselines are set, for each jurisdiction individually, but there is flexibility to allow, municipal and county governments, for example, to partner on meeting those. So, we know lots of county governments don't want to be building new housing in, unincorporated areas and just kind of furthering sprawl and things like that. So, partnerships there with local governments where you're actually building housing that counts towards the county baselines, but the housing is actually being built within the municipal jurisdiction. That's certainly, allowed and encouraged.
Thank you for clarifying that. Does that help, Rand?
Yes, it is helpful. Maybe Douglas County is a little unique where the majority of our population is in unincorporated. So it's actually it's a harder burden on our municipalities to do this on their own. And so we have found in working with our housing partnership that working together historically on things like private activity bonds or other types of development projects, it has been a very collaborative approach to addressing low-income housing, and we certainly would advocate for approaches and solutions to access, these resources in a collaborative way. We do feel that that makes the best impact in a community as opposed to isolating in one particular jurisdiction.
Great.
As allowable. So I guess
Yeah.
what I'm asking is maybe at some point in time within the context of the bill, what can we do to work with the states to find the creative solutions so that we really can have the outcomes that are intended?
Definitely. More conversations to follow. We'll give that some further thought. And we'll talk about this later on too. So there's going to be several more opportunities to have these discussions. This is not the end of the line. So more to follow. With the interest of time, I'm going to move on, Ryan, if that's okay, for this particular conversation. Don Cameron. There we go. I think I just heard you, Don.
Yeah, okay. I want to go back to something Connor had said earlier about making adjustments about houses that are actually for sale. So let's say you go through the whole ACS database, you've got your AMI, you found 60% AMI, all that stuff. You've got your number of houses, but then you're allowed to make an adjustment for what is actually for sale. Could you say more about that? Because like in Golden, there's essentially nothing that is affordable at 100% AMI, despite what the ACS may tell us. So what does that adjustment look like and how do you justify it?
So what we did in those reference estimates is we, for each locality, we looked at the portion of homeowners that moved into their homes within the past 4 years. And that is what we prorated that stock by. So if there's 100,000 affordable homes, but only 20% of folks are moving, we call that 20,000 of those home ownership units are both affordable and available to be purchased. I think there's various ways that it could be done with this new interactive resource that Ben is working on. Folks will be able to take a slider and for the rental and home ownership sides, be able to choose with what percentage of availability, how does that impact your baseline? And it's essentially a choose your own adventure to come up with your baseline, and it's going to be very illustrative and really walk everyone through the process from beginning to end. But I don't know if there's any kind of bounds on it. One thing that I have been thinking about, and maybe Luke has some thoughts on, is when you're looking at the homeownership units that are available, I wonder if it makes sense to have a wider perspective than just a single point in time. Like, don't just limit that scope to the units available on March 15th, 2013.
Go ahead, Luke. I do have a follow-up real quick after Luke says his answer.
No, I was just gonna, clarify that there's no definition about how that part of the calculation has to be done that's in the measure. I think Connor's answer there makes a lot of sense where, it probably doesn't make sense to look specifically at like, one single point in time. It probably makes more sense to look at it like how many are on the market over a year or something like that. But yeah, there's certainly no kind of restriction on that in the measure. It just says, that could be purchased.
Okay. So slightly off track, but back to the utilities, I just want to say that because of the state definition around affordability, and even I saw in the chat that somebody proposed that Denver, be allowed to go to 35% and stuff like that. I think that in the next 3 years, we've got to figure out whether just because the ACS says they're affordable, that people are actually able to afford them and they're not paying 50, 60% of their income toward rent and utilities. So I think that over the next few years, it'd be nice if we could sort through that, because I really don't trust this measure as telling us what's truly affordable when it comes down to what people are putting out of pocket for their rents. But I understand you had to come up with something, so I accept it. Just not happy with it.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate that. We are actually at time pretty much for this part, but there were a couple of people that had their hands up. So I will go through one more and then we'll transition. If we can't get to all your questions, by all means, reach out to us via the email we've previously provided. And as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be other opportunities. So I'm going to call on Amy, and then we're just going to transition to the next topic, if you guys don't mind. Amy Weidman. Apologies if I mispronounced your last name.
Yeah, hi there. I am kind of following up on the question that was asked by Douglas County regarding multi-jurisdictional partnerships. And you had mentioned that the baselines are set for each jurisdiction individually, but you're allowed to meet those goals, the 3% goals, by working on a joint project. So if so, is it up to that partnership to decide who gets, credit for how many units? Or is that, how would you assign those increases in units? Would it be towards, amongst those partners? Is there a rule for that, or is that going to be up to those partnerships? I was just going to tag on to that question. And
Thank
then
you.
I also, yeah.
We just limit to one because we got to get to the other one section. Yep. But my thought is it would be up to you guys to figure out how to achieve the 3% increase of the baseline number specific to your locality. But
okay,
Luke, if you want to add further anything different to that.
I think we certainly want to be flexible with that, and if there's, more affordable housing kind of being built in the municipality, if that's a partnership, I think that certainly makes sense to defer there.
Okay, and for the questions that we entered when we registered for this that won't be answered, will you guys follow up on with answers for those questions?
Yes.
From the registration. Okay. Thank you so much.
Sorry, we just couldn't address everything, every specific question in this time frame. We're trying to hit things generally, if that makes sense.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. All right. Connor, on to the next part of the presentation, please.
Sounds good. In the next section, we're going to go over some design materials that we have mocked up for what the submission of commitments could look like. So we'll show you some drafts of forms that we've created to go through that process. And the length of that process, I think, is fairly short in general. If the use of flexibilities is kept low by localities, I think that all of the information that the state needs could be collected in just one page. But if some flexibilities are needed, like using local data as opposed to the American Community Survey, or a median income that's different than your own area median income, that will require just some brief explanation for our own reference. Now, just to kind of run through what this could look like, how it would probably start out is by collecting two things. What do you think your baseline amount of affordable housing is? And where did you get that data? So both of these are important because it's the baseline amount that determines your annual goal later. And it's the data source that lets us know really where did this come from? And if the data source came from the Division of Housing and this tool that our team is working on, then we think that you will just be able to copy and paste the link to where you came up with that data, because you will be selecting in that tool, what's your jurisdiction? What year do you want to use this data from? Even your interest rate and things like that, all of that can be automatically populated. And if you copy and paste it in there for us, we should be able to completely reproduce your results without having to re-enter things you've already come up with. And then once we know what your baseline is and where it came from, then it can go straight to the end of the process where you describe if you're going to prioritize some key aspects that the proposition takes interest in. And that's high density housing, mixed income housing, environmental sustainability, and the deconcentration of affordable housing. So none of these are mandatory, but the proposition says that cities and counties can prioritize these things. And at the very bottom, we have a space where localities can just confirm that they are. Oh, is someone on the state team moving the images around? But anyways, at the bottom, you are automatically presented with your annual and 3-year goals based on your baseline in the very first box at the top, and you can just confirm that it makes sense to you before submitting it. And this is potentially the end of the submission process, unless additional information has to be provided to really substantiate the information source that was used. So if it isn't taken directly from this interactive tool, then we might need some brief information on, hey, how big is the household size that you use to calculate that limit? When you got that data from HUD, for example, was it for this current year or was it a past one? But by having some brief information on this, that will allow us to walk back through your own steps and to see how you got to your own baseline as well. And there could be one additional step, which is if a different median income is chosen than your own area median income. And we just have a box where folks can describe why they wanted to choose, for example, the area median income of an adjacent jurisdiction or the state household median income. And that's how it fits into the petitioning that Mo described earlier. So at this point, and we're absolutely would like some feedback on this to see what would be helpful, what's missing. And I do think that this submission of commitments should be fairly straightforward, fairly easy, just a few steps, and maybe a few more steps depending on if some flexibility is needed. I think if you're familiar with, for example, federal grant applications, this should be far simpler than something like that, which is similar in process.
Thank you, Connor. We do have a question in the chat. Great question from Steve Posey from Colorado Springs, I believe. Is there a requirement for an elected official to make the commitment?
No, I believe the answer is no.
Correct. So yeah. So we thought about this, Steve, and we left it up to you, the locality, to make that determination as to who's speaking on your behalf. But it would be very helpful if only one person is authorized to do that, and that's the person that's submitting this to us. But we will let you figure out who that person is.
One more slight elaboration on that is, so this system isn't live or anything, but it would also allow folks to log in, check the status of their submission and things like that. So at that kind of logging in and initiation process, where we're really going to be taking the word of the registrants, where you select, hey, this is my city or my county, that you have that authority to submit a commitment as an appointed official on behalf of your locality. And I see some additional questions here. Are there any hand raises, Mo, or should I start fielding chat questions?
There was a hand up, but it went down. Once again, the preference, folks, if you're just joining, is if you could raise the hand, it would be much easier if we can go through your questions that way. Don's back on from Golden. Don?
Yeah, great. Yeah, my question is, I looked at the spreadsheet and already looked at Golden's numbers, but then I tried to.
Did anyone else lose Don, or is that just me?
I did.
Don, unfortunately, we can't.
Sorry.
Don, can you hear us?
Can you hear me now better?
Yes, yes. If you don't mind starting all over again, we lost you just as you really got started.
Yes, sorry about that. Will the ACS data be linked exactly to the interactive tool? Did you catch me again, or did it mute?
No, we caught you.
Yeah, because I tried to do some of the calculations myself, but the ACS data is a little hard to navigate.
Yeah, so that's right, Don. How we see this progressing is folks can start with this upcoming interactive tool that hasn't been shown or outlined here. It's still under development. They would use that to research and design that baseline. And once you figure out, hey, my baseline is 100,000 units, you're able to take that and submit a commitment with that information that you've come up with that interactive tool. So you wouldn't have to get any data. You would just go straight to this website and do your selections of your locality, and it would really guide you through the process. There's no data, no math required. Our analyst, Ben, is really trying to make it intuitive for you all. And something that we'll cover later in the engagement portion is where you can find additional contextual information on those spreadsheets we've already made available. Did that answer your questions, Don, or can I do more?
No, that was great. And if Ben wants a test case, I will be happy to be one. So I'll just drop my contact in the chat because I'd love to be able to test it.
Thanks, Don. And if any other folks would like to test this upcoming interactive tool before we put it live for the public, we'd appreciate that so that we can make it work well for everyone. It's really close, but just wasn't ready to share today. And one other point of clarification, this interactive tool, it's still entirely non-mandatory. If folks want to do their own research, their own analyses, they're welcome to do so. But we know that the ACS is fairly complex, so we want to do what we can to help. And we'll be putting additional information out there in the coming weeks to get feedback and improve things, because we know that the timeline is fairly fast here.
Well, as soon as you volunteered that opportunity, the chat has been a buzzing with volunteers. This is fantastic. So hopefully, Ben, I hope you're taking notes and capturing all the folks that would like to be included in that soft launch, if you will, of the interactive tool, because they're coming in hot and heavy here. Sarah Tober, I think you had your hand raised in the last segment. I want to make sure you get recognized this time.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, great. Hi, yes, my name is Sarah Tober, and I am with the La Plata County Regional Housing Alliance. We have been relaunching our efforts here in the last year. And my question is related to La Plata County. So the Regional Housing Alliance acts like a regional housing authority, except that we are an intergovernmental agreement between 4 government entities. So it's La Plata County and then 3 of our municipalities. And so the question I have is actually kind of from La Plata County, in that if they choose to not pursue funding through Prop 123, if the RHA would still be eligible and our municipalities will still be eligible to pursue.
How the language in the statute is framed is for affordable housing projects or programs, you will be eligible for funding if you are located in a municipality that has submitted a commitment, or if you are in an unincorporated area of a county that has submitted a commitment. So if a county has not submitted a commitment, but the city that a project or a program is located in has, then there is no issue. Does that make sense, Sarah?
It does. It does make sense. And I know that the way that we are put together as an entity makes it a little more complicated since there's 4 entities that we are a part of. And I know that every municipality will be pursuing this. So I guess that might be a little bit of a complex situation that I might need a little more input from you all on. If we're able to pursue it for a city, then it would have to be for one of the cities that are actually pursuing it and adjacent to that project without the county pursuing this then. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we would be more than happy to talk offline in more detail, if that'd be helpful. And we could definitely involve Gary and Luke as well in that conversation, just to make sure we're fully understanding everything and being able to get exactly to the answer that would be helpful. But in general, what Connor said is exactly spot on. That's how it's laid out in the Proposition 123. You have to commit in order to unlock the funds for your specific locality.
Okay.
Whether you're doing the project yourself or somebody else is developing in your locality.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Great question. Perry, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
My headset said I was unmuted, but it wasn't. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I actually want to follow up on that question from La Plata County, because it does become an issue where I'm in Gunnison County. And I work for Gunnison County, but we have affordable housing projects that we've done that are within municipalities. And the municipalities have projects that are done within unincorporated county. So it seems like there's a bit of a challenge there of demonstrating meeting the commitment if the location of the housing development is, straddling or in a different spot. Or is this a non-issue, or is this something that we need to build into our strategies as we look for locations and land, et cetera?
I'm happy to respond to that. Perry, it's great to hear that you're from Gunnison, because Gunnison was kind of the example that we kept using internally as we were developing the measure early last year.
Great.
But yeah, I think this gets to kind of what we were answering earlier, that recognizing that the projects that count towards meeting these targets won't always be on the right side of the jurisdictional lines, within the municipality, or maybe outside of the incorporated area, or vice versa. So definitely want to have flexibility with how we kind of defer towards local partnerships and such, and definitely want to take flexibility towards how those are counted, rather than trying to be very strict about exactly which side of the municipal boundary that those housing units are on.
But would that necessarily require a partnership? I don't think this is an issue for us in Gunnison County, because we do really well with partnering on that, but I just want to imagine worst case scenarios.
It's that's something I'd have to think a little bit more about. It's hard for me to imagine a situation where someone wants to build affordable housing in someone else's jurisdiction, and that is kind of opposed by the other jurisdiction, or they're not even willing to kind of like let you accept partial credit for that. So yeah, I guess that's something I'd have to think a little bit more about. Maybe that's something we can talk about offline.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, definitely the coordination topic has been flagged for all of us to revisit with everybody. So great questions on that. Jim Felton. Please go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. Well, my question's been addressed. We can move on. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Your hand was still up. Sorry, I must have
Yeah,
forgot to lower it. Is it Ava or Eva Henson?
Hi, it's Eva Henson. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you for correcting your pronunciation of your name. Sorry.
No worries. Eva Henson, City of Durango, and I'm so glad that La Plata RHA brought up one of the questions that we've been discussing. One of the things that we think about for the housing folks that are going to be implementing this and executing this and tracking this and reporting this is around that 3% baseline. And part of that increase in the next 3 years is we're all trying to navigate RFPs and securing affordable housing developers and navigating public-private partnerships and trying to just, leverage city funds, local funds to really get folks to commit to doing housing that's more affordable. And so when I think about that 3% increase, projects getting approved through planning to actually getting constructed to actually getting built and getting issued COs. So how are we going to start to track some of this when funding is needed on the front end of projects, but then is the 3% increase based on a CO that's issued? Because projects could take 18 months from acquisition to approval to being built. And many of us are learning some of those delays, are out of our control because it's not our project that we're actually building. And so if you could kind of speak a little bit to that, like we have a project that's 120 units, but that would equivalent more than 3 years worth of inventory, but it may not get completed until 2024.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the measure specifies that it is counted at the time the permits are issued. So, you're certainly not kind of like held liable in a sense for, the construction delays that we've all really seen intimately over the last couple of years.
That's super helpful. And I'm sure many of us are all thinking about that too, because a lot of these projects aren't pulling building permits right after a project's getting approved. If they've got to get subdivided and put lots in and get infrastructure and get roads in, it's not going to create a unit in 12 months.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. That's something where, I'll need to think a little more about that. I don't know if, Connor or Mo, if you'll have other thoughts.
I don't at this time. It's an excellent question and something to ponder further, but I don't think you want to hear me fire from the hip on this one.
I think something we're taking notes on are topics like this, where we can keep the discussion going on this engagement site, so that we can do that over time without all having to be in the same room.
Exactly.
Yeah, how are we doing on time for that portion, Mo? Should I be moving on to that?
No, we're good for now. We got about another 8 minutes. We do have Commissioner Pogue, who's patiently had her hand up. Commissioner?
Thanks, Mo. And apologies, I think a number of people are logged in under my name, and so it may seem like I'm incredibly inquisitive today. I think, and perhaps I'm jumping ahead on this question, but could one of you clearly and concisely walk through each of the funding strategies or allowable uses of the funds, the eligible AMI for each one of those uses, and then how that connects back to this baseline data?
I think so, Mo, at the end, our different teams and Jaffa will be going over the funding programs, right?
That is correct. At a high level, we're not going to deep dive into them because we do have a separate engagement workshop for those purposes, 2 separate ones, but at a high level, yes.
And you'll be going over the commitment compliance portion, right?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, so I think, Commissioner, that so Mo will talk about why is it that the commitments matter? How do the commitments connect with the programs? And then the program folks will go over the funding in and of itself.
But definitely Luke may want to weigh in on why the commitments matter as well. So feel free to answer that question now. We'll give you guys some thoughts on it, or anybody else, before we transition to that part, since the question has been raised.
I think that, I think your comment was exactly right, that's, more a topic for towards the end of this meeting, and especially the next upcoming stakeholder meeting. But just like from the most high level, as far as the intent here, I think the commitments were really intended to help make sure that these funds are going towards places that are really, invested in promoting affordable housing, and making sure that they're really used effectively in that way, kind of from the very highest level of kind of what the intent was. But, I think as far as the other details of how this ties in with the actual programs, I think that's something that we'll talk about soon.
Awesome. And so Commissioner Vogt, hopefully we cover everything as we go through the rest of the presentation. But if we don't, let's definitely circle back if that's okay. Not sure if you heard me. All right, we're going to transition to Mike Bordagna. Hope I'm saying the last name correctly.
It's Bordogna, but that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
And thanks for the chance. I was curious in that baseline, what inventory of housing is used? Is it free market? Is it your existing deed restricted? And then my related, but not totally related question is, we have 54 deed restricted units that are just about to get their COs. They were both in unincorporated county that were annexed into municipalities. And would those units count, or is it only after, what's the date moving forward that the baseline? So one is a date, and then tied to that is credit for those units currently that are being just finished. And then the first question was just about what inventory is being used for that baseline.
For the first question, the inventory is subsidized and unsubsidized. Whether the unit is affordable isn't determined by the subsidy status. It's based on who it's affordable to and those median income levels, those income limits. The second question on annexation isn't something that I've thought of yet. I guess maybe before we move on to the second, does the answer for the first make sense, Mike?
Mostly, what I hear is that it's regardless of deed restricted status, it's purely about affordability status. So where we have deed restricted units that are not still affordable, those would not count. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's so long as that rent or price is at the affordability levels calculated based on that median income the locality chooses.
Okay, thank you.
And as far as, I just want to make sure I follow on the annexation, is that in terms of, so if a locality is annexing units, when does that get included in their baseline or not?
Yeah, so essentially our county, we had 2 county projects that we partnered with, one with a nonprofit, one with another municipality. During or right at construction, they were both annexed in, and I'm curious, A, if they count towards our initial 3%, and then how to handle that proration, or is it just simply a negotiation with those jurisdictions?
Yeah, I'm not quite following all of it. I think this one needs some more unpacking just to make sure we're specifically understanding your needs and can address them. So if you don't mind, Mike, can we take that one offline?
That'd be great.
and
Thank
unpack
you.
further, that'd be great. Thank you. Appreciate it. And
Thank
if you
you.
don't mind just dropping your email here in the chat, and then
I did
will-
already. Thank you.
Okay, all right,
Yep.
great. We're at time for this segment, but there are two people that are patiently waiting for some time. So hopefully they can make it pretty quick and we can address those two before we transition to the next part. So I'll start with Crystal Launder.
I am so sorry. I didn't intend to request to speak.
Oh, all good. Well, you've been heard. That's the good news. We'll transition. Lisa Bloomquist, did you want to speak?
Yes, I'd like to speak.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
So I'm wondering how homes that are purchased with mortgage assistance or down payment assistance are considered. So, you know, a home may be, down payment assistance may be used to purchase a market rate home that's priced at a rate that would say be affordable to a household at 150% AMI. But with the down payment assistance, it can be affordable to a household at, you know, 85% AMI, just giving example numbers. How is that looked at for both a baseline and results?
Oh, go for it, Luke.
I was going to defer to you, but anyway, I would be happy to hear Connor's thoughts here as well. But I think that would not count either for the baseline or for kind of meeting those targets, you know, in 3 years when you're looking back, mainly because, you know, looking at the census data that's kind of at the basis of the baselines, I don't think it would be captured in there. And then also, you know, since it's not, you know, deed restricted or kind of affordable permanently, then I don't think it would count towards meeting those commitments either. But again, you know, that's something I would need to look a little bit more closely at the language on. And yeah, I'm curious if Connor, if you have other thoughts there.
Yeah, I agree with you on the kind of back end of the process with the compliance. I think you could interpret the statute on the front end for home ownership. There's that clause about the home is affordable if it could be purchased by a household at that income level. So I mean, I guess if down payment assistance is a part of that you could put some higher priced homes into your affordable housing baseline. I guess the question would be, how would you go about doing that from a methods perspective? It seems potentially tricky. And as a locality, what do you want to do that to make your baseline goals higher? So those are two things to consider there. I do think the more we think about it, there's probably two topics for engagement that we'll want to have more continuous feedback and discussion on, and it's that kind of scope of what's included in a baseline and not, and what's included in the commitment compliance and what's not. Just so that it's extra easy for folks on both sides of the table to follow. Well, I think we better roll over to this engagement website portion. Is that right, Mo?
That is correct, Connor.
And I guess I better do a little extra quick for the rest of folks. Okay, so there is a website that everybody can visit now, or maybe even better at the end of this meeting, to stay engaged in this process. We call it engagedjola.org, and you can reach it with the / of Prop 123. This was just published this morning, and this is where you can find three things: information about educational materials. You can seek customer service from the state, and you can provide feedback. So if you go to this website after the meeting, you'll find links to articles and educational materials. And that's where you all can find links to those ACS tables that folks were wanting in the chat. You can find answers to some of the questions that have been raised in the chat or verbally as well. You'll find some key dates for reference in terms of the compliance portions that Mo is going to be going over in a few minutes here. But this isn't just passive content and browsing. What we are transitioning to is fielding questions through this website as well. So if folks submit questions there, we'll field them from you individually and respond, but also categorize them into topics and frequently asked questions so that the folks that come after you can benefit from what you've asked and what we've shared as well. And thank you to Don for posting the link there. Eventually, there will be other services available too. So when these tools are ready, on Engage DOLA, we'll have links to the commitment submissions. We'll have links to this interactive tool. So make sure to visit it frequently for those updates. But we also want to have rapid feedback on this implementation as well. We want to know these educational materials that we have, how can they be elaborated on? What is it that's unclear? What's missing? So there are comments that are moderated by the vendor on the site. I'm sure nothing foul would raise with this group, but it's publicly available. So you might notice a delay between when you post something and when it's made available on the website. And that's because the moderation is being done by the vendor. And we're also going to be publishing polls so that we can test the assumptions that we're making and design these policies and processes so they work for as many folks as possible. And here's an example of some of this content. We're going to encourage everyone to visit this site after so that you can fill out this poll. So based on the presentation that you've been hearing here and the content available on the website, what is it that you'd like to learn more about, if anything, so that we know how to kind of iron out the edges here. But there's other types of content as well. Here's the questions and answers that we're going over. And folks will be able to submit their own as well. And we will get notified immediately when there's a submission. And this is really going to help us from drowning in email inboxes and get back to you faster. So very appreciative for everyone that has been using the Prop 123 at state.co.us email address, and we'll continue to monitor that. But if you have questions, this will be the preferred place so that other folks can benefit from them as well. And that's really the end of this section. And before we hand stuff over to the rest of the presenters, really just make sure to visit this Engagement HQ website for a variety of reasons. Visit back there, whether you want to learn about concepts or provide some feedback. Really want to make this rapid implementation work for everyone. And we'll appreciate everyone's involvement as we move through the spring and summer here. And now I think we're ready for questions.
Yes, I see Brian Gallagher.
Yes, Mo, thank you. As far as items to put onto the engagement interactive theory here, I think you're going to have to draw a picture of what a 1, 2, 3 project looks like. We've all done affordable housing. Particular project's going to handle so much debt service. Then our usual sources of finding soft money is how we make these things work. And as the entire state runs to the 2 or 3 soft market areas, how I think we need to show how this is really going to work. You're getting a lot of questions about the baseline because building 9% additional housing stock in 3 years is a pretty big task, but we got to find out where the money's coming from. And, you know, from our initial first 3 years, the state funding is probably maybe 10% of the requirement. Do we have any guidance moving forward on that?
That's a great question. No, if I have a good answer for you right now. And yes, Ryan, I agree. It's a great question. We do have several opportunities to chat further about this. You raise an excellent point about visually laying out what a Prop 123 project would look like, especially when you're talking about commitments being made before funding is available, right? So we definitely need to talk further about that, and can have some thoughts for your consideration. I do see Pat Myers' hand up. I wonder if it's related to this. But anyway, more to follow on that. But there are several opportunities here to chat further. We're going to have several more conversations with local governments. Not as wide of an audience like this one, but more tailored specifically to those that have representative organizations, kind of organizing their thoughts into a forum. And then, of course, if anybody wants to talk directly to us as a local government, we can have those conversations. But there's also going to be 2 opportunities specifically addressing the program funding as well. So more conversation to be had. But Pat, I saw your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Can you hear me now, Mo?
Yes, I can, Pat.
Yeah, I think you just covered it, but basically we're going to have stakeholder meetings with CHAFA on the OEDA CHAFA programs, which that's what I think that question goes to. And so definitely attend those. And then as Mo said, I think we're going to have a number of opportunities to figure out exactly how this program works in conjunction with other capital stack programs. And a lot of devil in the details, but it's definitely something that we need to and will address. That's it. Thanks, Mo.
Yeah, thank you, Pat. That was helpful. I just muted myself and started talking. Apologies. We had a couple more folks. David Kimmett.
Yeah, hi. Thanks a lot. Appreciate this whole presentation, everyone. This is David Kimmett from the town of Lyons. And I have a question on the cumulative nature of the 3% annual growth. We are a small municipality and we could easily hit 3% with a couple of houses, but housing doesn't happen quick or easy here. So could we accommodate the 3% annual growth target by one fell swoop of 12%?
Great question. And this is a fantastic segue to the next part of this presentation. So apologies for those with your hands up. We're going to use this opportunity to make that transition. Hopefully we still have some time left at the end of this conversation to address any lingering questions that haven't been addressed. But if we can't get to everything, if we could just communicate with us outside of this, we'll make sure to do so. So thank you, David, for teeing it up just perfectly. So Connor, would you like to stop presenting?
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. And then I will start presenting. All right, can you guys see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so compliance is what we'll be talking about. So Proposition 123 does identify some specifics about what it looks like to have an effective commitment in place and what that means if you don't. And the same with, of course, to your point, David, about that 9%. So I'll start with the commitment piece. Of course, we're all driving today We have some time, mercifully, but still November 1st is what we're trying to get local jurisdictions to have their commitments, those that are interested and ready to roll for this first cycle, to have that done by November 1st. The good news is, if you can't make it by November 1st of this year, that doesn't mean you're frozen out for the next 3 years, right? Your fund, you wouldn't have, as we talked about earlier, you wouldn't have access to the funding, or any development going on in your jurisdiction have access to the 123 funding. Please know that. There's a lot of other funding available for affordable housing through us, CHAFA, and others, but we're talking about specifically that 123 funding, right? You wouldn't be eligible for that funding for the 2024 calendar year. But with that being said, you can get back in, right? So if you need more time, this November 1st, for whatever reason, it's just not going to be doable, then you can be actually working towards a 2-year commitment or even a 1-year commitment, right? So now you're going from 9% overall to 6% if you're ready for a 2-year commitment, or 3% if you're looking at a 1-year commitment, just depending on what your needs are and where you're at, and what you can get lined up to make that happen. So hopefully that makes sense to folks. There is some flexibility, mercifully, in Prop 123. Thank you, Gary, and others who put that together to make sure that that was included. Now, with regard to actually complying with your commitment, once you have a commitment in place, and of course, I'm going to start by illustrating the first cycle here. So those that are due by November 1st of this year, you're now locked in to a 9% increase over that 3-year time frame. Now, Prop 123 is specific, and it says, to your point, David, it says 3% each year, right, for 3 years, which equals 9%. We've interpreted to mean what ultimately matters is the 9% at the end of it, not the 3% each year, right? That's just helping us get to the 9%. And Gary and Luke have agreed with that interpretation, mercifully. So to what you were asking about, if you're committed to the 9%, or 12%, I think is what you said, for the 3 years, and you can't get to your first 3% in year 1 or your next 3% in year 2, that's not going to matter. All that matters is you got that 9% at the end of the 3 years. Does that make sense, David? I hope I've answered your question. If you still have a follow-up question, we can get to it at the end of the segment. And I think I saw this in the chats too. You have to demonstrate this by showing for new housing that they've been permits have been issued for them, right? They've been permitted to proceed. They don't have to be built. That's the good news, because as we all know, once something is green lighted, it may take several years for it to actually be built. But once it's been permitted, and one of the questions I think was define what that means, but really, I would assume every local jurisdiction, every building part, it means it's basically the green light by that building department to start building. Doesn't mean it's going to start building the next day, but at least the building department has said, okay, go ahead and start. So that's how I'm seeing it. But if anybody has any thoughts about, further articulating what that actually means, we're definitely all ears here. And then for existing housing, Prop 123 establishes that it's the first part, permitting, but also it has to be fully funded in order to count. And of course, we can go into more detail about this in future conversations as we really start to put together what this commitment process looks like, and we get more feedback from you guys. But that at a high level is what Prop 123 outlines, with demonstrating that you've met the 9% over 3-year requirement. Okay, and then similar to the commitment, the compliance with the actual doing what you committed to doing has some flexibility built in as well, right? So if you don't make it, it's determined you didn't get your 9% done at the end of those 3 years, there's basically a timeout on funding for the next calendar year, which you can get back in to play, if you will, by filing a new commitment. It'd be a short commitment, but then trying again and trying to hit it that way. Of course, I think to repeat what Pat said earlier, the devil is going to be in details on what that looks like. So we still got to work on that process, and would love to hear more feedback from you guys about what that should look like. But hopefully that answers at a high level the questions you guys had about this particular piece. The other good news is the fast track approval process. Now, this was a common question in the questions you guys provided in advance of this meeting, so thank you for that. Mercifully, it's not something we have to, or you have to account for in this first 3-year cycle. That is the good news, okay? So for those of you who are gonna be ready to roll on November 1st of this year, or even a 2-year version or a 1-year version for this first cycle, you don't have to account for the fast track approval process, okay? It's that next cycle, right, that starts on November 1st, 2026. So we've got some time to more fully bake what that looks like. And we're gonna go into a little bit more detail about this later on when Andy Hill from Division of Local Government takes the mic, if you will. But they're gonna be, just to kind of tee it up, they're gonna be helping us and really helping you guys, I should say, with this part of it. So more to follow on that. But for now, if you've got some great ideas, some questions or concerns, don't need to have them addressed immediately. We will be rolling out another one of these, if you will, focused on that and working closely with DLG on that and communicating with you guys and getting your feedback on what that should look like. So keep those good thoughts handy, just don't need them right now, or questions or concerns, quite frankly. And then Prop 123 also does specify that as you're considering the fast track process and what that looks like, or if you've got one and just saying, well, let's just see how it compares to 123, it's you're talking about a final decision on the complete application. And as you can see, there's some examples on the slide. And this is where it's going to be interesting to get some feedback, right? What does that final decision look like, right? And what is a complete application, right? So there's some flexibility there. But whenever those two determinations are made, right? And you're talking specifically about a project as outlined here, right? Then there's a 90-day clock that ticks, and it's 90 calendar days is what's provided. Now, there is some flexibility to extend that for an additional 90 calendar days. And then, of course, there's also provisions for granting additional extensions as well. Now, with that being said, I did catch something interesting in that last bullet when it talks about the 30 days. I just want to make sure my understanding is correct, because it was written a little bit differently. Is in essence, it's once an extension is a request, I guess, from the local jurisdiction, the local building department is made for additional information, right, to supplement whatever was provided. The responding party has 5 business days to respond if they can, right? That's the clock that they're working with. But then once they respond, there's 30 days in which that building department then needs to make a decision. Now, Prop 123 just says 30 days in this case. It doesn't say business or calendar days. I assume it's calendar days, but it'd be nice to get some clarity from somebody who may have more knowledge about the intent of that. Just wanted to flag that, unless I missed something. It wasn't specific on business or calendar days with that particular piece. Just once again, we're not in any hurry for this piece, but we are going to start working on it here in the near future.
Sorry, Mo, do you want me to jump in on that?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Sure. So yeah, I think the intent there was calendar days just to remain consistent, within the definition. But I appreciate you calling out the piece that basically like the clock stops while while the developer is responding to follow-up questions, and the other kind of extensions that are allowed to be included in those processes. And I think the only other thing I would flag is just that this is what DOLA has to certify for eligibility is just that the local government has a process in place that meets these standards. It's not, DOLA is not going to be kind of looking over the shoulder of every project that gets approved, making sure it's, happening in 90 days and not 91 or anything like that. The standard is just that the process is in place.
Great, Luke, that's very helpful. Thank you so much. And that was the compliance and the fast track parts of the presentation and content we wanted to cover with you guys. we actually have about 5 minutes for questions on that piece, if anybody has any. I'm actually sharing my screen so somebody else could manage. Connor, are there any hands up?
So we have Robin Hanrahan. I don't know if it's related to this topic, but oh, yeah, you're unmuted, Robin.
Okay, hi. Yeah, my name is Robin Hanrahan. I'm a private planning consultant for Rangeley, Colorado on the Western Slope. Semi-related, but I was wondering if there would be any type of housing fund set aside for individuals to apply for accessory dwelling units, which would minimize the impact on soft funding and larger programs, especially in rural areas that might not be capable of securing additional funds for larger projects. Yeah, or if all of the funding would need to be applied for by municipalities or public-private partnerships or housing authorities.
Great question, Robin. That's probably better served to be addressed at our next two opportunities for that particular topic, which is the program funding. And so, and we'll cover this at the end of this presentation. There's a slide that has specific dates and what is going to be covered. But just so you know now, just so you know we're going to get there, is on March 24th, the Division of Housing and the Division of Local Government, the Department of Local Affairs, will be talking about its three programs. So home ownership, homelessness, and local planning capacity development, which you see on the slide in front of you, which is the next section. And then on April 4th, OEDA and CHAFA will be talking about their three programs. And so I would encourage you to participate in both of those because you're actually asking a great question, and it should be considered as part of those two opportunities when we start to really think about the funding for Prop 123. So I hope that helps.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Great question. Connor, anyone else?
Yeah, we've got one from Perry as well. I'll put Perry on.
Yeah, thank you. Mo, can you go back to your slide 22? So this was touched upon earlier. I can't remember if it was the gentleman from Golden, but one of the concerns I have, especially with such a, there's a variety of different deed restriction projects that have been done, and some of those were, you know, or hopefully most of those would be included in our baseline. But depending on how those were designed, some of those are going to drop out of the affordability range. How does that go into our increase? Does that essentially get netted against our increase? So if I have 100 affordable units and we build, you know, 100, we build 9 new ones, but maybe 5 of that original 100 has gone away. So really, we're only at 104. Does that not meet the commitment?
That's a great question. Luke, I would love to hear from you. But the way once again, you know, to touch upon something we've talked about earlier, we want this to be as useful as possible to local jurisdictions, right? While at the same time, of course, meeting the framework of Proposition 123. So I think it'll be helpful for you guys to articulate to us, right, as you go on through and developing your commitment process, what that looks like, right, and what you are considering to be, in effect, carrying over as part of your baseline, or you know, being accounted for as either new development or rehabilitation, meeting your commitment piece to build on your baseline. So I think it's going to require some dialogue between us, and we of course want to be as helpful as possible to really suit your needs. So I think we would have to see it and have that conversation to understand how best to help you achieve what you're trying to get to, which ultimately is 9% over 3 years. But we'd love to hear more from Luke or anybody else, from Gary, about that.
Yeah, Perry, that's a astute question, and you know, I think your interpretation is right, that this is looking at a gross increase, not a net increase. So, you know, if you're hitting that 9% over 3 years, you're not kind of also being held responsible for the loss of naturally occurring affordable units or other deed restrictions, deed restricted units that may be losing their deed restrictions. So then the net increase is likely to be, less than 3% a year, if you're coming in right at that 3% top line number.
Okay, terrific. And actually, thank you to Mo, because that's interesting, because I think as we start to just brainstorm around here on how we're going to, address this strategy, it would be helpful if we could talk, be part of the process with you all to look at how, I'm come from an economics background, so I'm really seeing a lot of variability in what's going to come with interest rates, et cetera, construction costs changing and everything else. And it does get scary to think, okay, we have a great plan, it's going to work, we're going to hit our percentages, but then during a 3-year period, that's a really long time, especially in the Colorado housing environment. So that's a little bit scary, but I think what it may come down to, and I'll put this on the engagement site, that some of this does have to be based on intent and best assumptions of at the time that you make the commitment. I don't know how to legislate, or I don't know how to put that into rules, but I'll try to engage with you on the site. Thank you.
Yeah, no, excellent points, Perry. We're looking forward to dialoguing on that. You mentioned rules, and I think somebody else mentioned rules in the chat. Am I missing something? We're not required to have any rules.
Not in the form of regulatory rules like the Colorado Code of Regulations.
Yeah, but just the framework of what we're implementing. Yeah, we're talking about that, then definitely, but we're not going to have actually rulemaking that's going to be happening. And apologies,
No,
I come from a regulatory
sorry.
background, so when I hear rules, I'm like,
yeah,
oh.
I'm not, sorry, I'm not from a regulatory background. So yeah, guidance, I guess, would be a better way of phrasing
Perfect.
that.
Policies and
Thank you.
guidance, absolutely. We're going to have plenty of that coming your way for your
Great.
consideration. We'll be working with you to make sure that it meets your needs. But yes,
Thank
definitely
you.
not rules. Thank you for clarifying that. So we're at, I think we're actually over time for that particular part. So we're going to transition quickly to the next part of our conversation, which will hopefully get to some of the other questions that we had. And for this, I'm going to tee it up a little bit for our next panel of folks. So just high level here. And this is not, of course, talking to the OEDA CHFA part of the funding. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have other opportunities to really dig into DOH, which this slide represents, and DLG, and then of course OEDA CHFA. And I'll remind you guys of those dates and those opportunities at the end of this presentation. But just real high level, remember we're getting 40% of it, right? OEDA CHFA is getting 60% of it. And here's a breakdown of the 3 programs that we'll be talking about here. The first program, Andrew Paredes, who is our director of our Office of Housing and Finance Sustainability, will be talking to that. And then we got Kristen Toombs from our Office of Homeless Initiatives talking about the second program. And then we're going to have Andy Hill from Division of Local Government talking about the third program. And just once again, a reminder of the numbers that we're talking about overall, the estimates that we'll be anticipating this fiscal year and next fiscal year. And just remember, folks, this is just high level. For those of you that really want to unpack the funding programs, we're going to have opportunities to do so down the road. So that being said, Andrew, the floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Mo, and hello to everybody. As Mo said, one of the applicable uses of the Prop 123 funds that will be administered by the Division of Housing are to promote homeownership opportunities. Half of the funds coming to the division will be used for that purpose. We at the division currently have existing programs that meet all of these objectives, and our programs currently fit within the Prop 123 guidelines. So we are happy and excited that we will be able to first off use these additional funds to augment existing programs that are in place and up and running to provide down payment assistance, loans, as well as loans to homeowners for rehab of their existing properties. We also have programs that provide loans and grants to nonprofits and community land trusts for the development and acquisition of homeownership opportunities, as well as to assist mobile home park ownership groups in the acquisition of their parks once a park goes for sale and they've gotten their statutorily required opportunity to purchase. Having said that, as Mo described, Proposition 123 allows for wider incomes and uses and deployment of funds for these purposes. So we look forward to upcoming stakeholder events so that we can get feedback as to what additional programs we should conceive of or what changes to our existing program guidelines, application, and rollout we should begin to consider as we draw up maybe new and revised program guidelines or different programs in the coming years to use this incredible increase in resources for homeownership opportunities. So like Mo said, this is very high level, just what we're doing kind of off the bat. We are reserving entire presentations and stakeholder feedback sessions to really get into the nitty gritty. But if there are high level questions, I am happy to take them.
Thank you, Andrew. Kristen, you ready or? Oh, you're on mute.
Good afternoon, everybody. Kristen Toombs, as Mo said, and as Andrew just shared, we are going very high level here and excited to dig into this more with everyone later. This is just high level what within Prop 123 are the parameters or the focus around homelessness. Similar to what Andrew shared, we at the Office of Homeless Initiatives and within the Division of Housing have a lot of existing parameters, programs, best practices, grants, parameters that we have. And so we look to not completely reinvent the wheel, but build off of those for efficiencies for all of us, but also have the opportunity, as Andrew shared, on the homeownership side, similar, this does give us an opportunity to have further discussion with you all at another time. So high level, what the Prop 123 says that we are able to do around homelessness that we can fund is rental assistance, housing vouchers, eviction defense assistance, which includes legal, financial, and case management around that. It also allows us to have preservation and development of supportive housing, and then other homeless related activities that we will determine at Division of Housing. Many of you are familiar, and we'll go into this at another time, around a lot of the program parameters, best practices, and models that we have, that we support and prioritize here at the Division of Housing as seen to be the most effective at resolving homelessness for our neighbors. And so that will be a lot of our basis for how we will determine those activities. But again, there will be opportunity in the future for us to have additional conversations around that and dig into that to get some additional input from you all. One thing to highlight too is that Prop 123 also specifically calls out housing programs paid for by Pay for Success model. And basically we'll go into that more at another time, but that provides an opportunity that the reimbursement is not simply based on spending of funds, but also based on meeting the intended outcomes that are agreed upon in the contract. And so we already do put a lot of outcomes into our grant agreements, but this really focuses that payment is tied to that specifically. So that will be, again, something that is possible through Prop 123, and we will dig into more with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kristen.
Thank you.
And Andy.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and put some quick information in the chat for you all. Andy Hill, I work for the Division of Local Government. I manage the Community Development Office, and we're excited that this proposition provided funds to support local governments in their work to obtain funds through this program. So there's a small grant program embedded that gives grants to local governments to increase your capacity of your local government planning departments that are responsible for permitting. So what we are thinking at this point that those funds will be available for, certainly developing the fast track and other streamlining development processes and technologies. So, grants to local governments so that they can hire help to do that work. Also, any kind of land use code amendments that effectively expedite or streamline affordable housing. Certainly staff or contractor assistance to review the housing applications within that expedited timeline. And then once your first commitment is accepted and you're eligible, we could help fund future commitment development as well. So our next steps are, in partnership with the Division of Housing, continue our outreach and engagement with local governments for input on this grant program. Also engage planners and developers to create fast track guidance and templates. So I already saw Christy Wiseman, thank you. If others of you are interested in helping us think through and provide guidance to local governments and share some of your best practices with each other, we'd love to help in that work. And then, I put some questions in the chat, one being, if you want to, we did send out a survey in partnership with CML, CCI, CCAT, and American Planning Association Colorado chapter. So if you've already submitted that survey, you don't need to do it again. But if you haven't, I put the link to the survey. It's just an informal survey to give us some ideas about where you're at and what you're thinking and what you need. And along those lines, we're hearing from some local governments through that survey that they need help through this, and they were hoping to get it through this local planning capacity grant program to help them develop this first commitment. If you're in that situation, I would love if you could email me or really anyone on the team. We're all working together so that we can think about what resources we might have to support that effort, now or this spring and summer. That's all I have. Thanks.
Great, Andy. Thank you so much. So next we have Jerry Lynn Francis from CHFA. They'll be speaking to the OEDIT CHFA side of this coin.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mo, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you. Really appreciate all the dialogue and thoughtful comments that have come forward today. I am Jerry Lynn Francis. I am the Chief Communications and Community Partnerships Officer for Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, CHFA. And CHFA has been honored to be selected by OEDIT to be the contract administrator for the programs within the Affordable Housing Financing Fund. As was mentioned at the very onset of this meeting, Proposition 123 allocates 60% of the monies authorized through the measure to the Affordable Housing Financing Fund that is directed by OEDIT, and we will serve as the contractor administrator for them. There are 3 programs that the measure outlines to be supported by the Affordable Housing Financing Fund, and at a very high level, these are those 3 programs. I'm going to give some highlights, but I'm also going to reinforce what other presenters have said today. We will have a very specific stakeholder meeting to hone in and deep dive in the Affordable Housing Financing Fund programs. That stakeholder meeting is being planned for April 4th from 3 to 5 p.m. The link to register and to join will be sent out at a future time, but please save the date for that April 4th to 3 to 5. The 3 programs that we'll be deep diving into at that time that are supported by the Affordable Housing Financing Fund are a land banking program. This is a program that allows for grants to be made to local governments and forgivable loans to be made to nonprofits with experience in affordable housing to support land banking. We can use between 15 and 25% of the proceeds in the financing fund for that land banking platform. The second program within the financing fund is a concessionary equity program. So the goal of concessionary equity program is to provide below market equity investment to support low and middle income multifamily rental housing. Interesting piece of the equity financing program is also a tenant equity vehicle component, which is intended to allow tenants who are residing at those properties supported for a year or more to have some return on investment. So we'll talk more about this at April 4th, but wanted to highlight that. The bulk of proceeds in the financing fund are actually set for this equity. So we can use between 40 to 70% of the financing fund to support equity finance, okay? The third and final program authorized for the financing fund is a concessionary debt program. And so for concessionary debt, that allows us to provide financing to support either the new construction or the preservation of existing low and middle income multifamily housing. It also allows us to provide financing for pre-development or gap funding for projects that would be eligible for low income housing tax credits. And it provides debt for modular or factory built manufacturers. So those are the eligible uses of the concessionary debt program. And we look forward to talking more about all of this with you on that April 4th stakeholder meeting. I did put into the chat a link to a page that OEdit has set up to already gather questions, input on the financing fund program specifically. Please feel free to send those in now. We welcome all of that. We welcome the questions that have come forward today, and we'll use that to help inform that future conversation. Appreciate the time.
Awesome, Jerry Lynn, great job. Thank you so much. Folks, I know we're at time. Did you want to talk about, oh, you already talked about this too, didn't you? Sorry, I forgot to advance your slide. Jerry Lynn, you already covered all this, right?
I did. Thank you. Sorry,
I got,
yeah. So let me go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You want to revisit it? Okay.
I should just have said, if you want to go back, sorry, I was trying to make sure I left a minute for you and I didn't. But let me just say that all of our programs have to look towards these priorities in the measure. So again, more to come on April 4th, but thanks for letting me flag that, Mo.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And I know folks, we're a little over time here, but I would encourage you to take a picture of this slide. This covers our upcoming events we've teased throughout this presentation, where we can really drill down into a lot more of this. So I hope the folks that are representing local government will have a chance to visit with CCAD, CML, CCI, and really tease up some additional questions or comments related to the commitment piece, so the baseline, the commitment piece. So these next round of meetings are tailored specifically to that, to make sure that we're addressing everybody's questions and comments about it. And so more details about this will be coming forward from those organizations to their membership if they haven't already done so. And then, of course, as we mentioned earlier, related to what Andrew, Kristen, Andy, and Jerry Lynn just talked about, we're going to have two major events coming up to talk about the program funds, right? So the first one will involve our three programs, two of which will be administered by DOH specifically, and then one with DLG, and that's going to take place here in the near future, next Friday. So please get that on your calendars if you are very much interested in having additional conversations about those funds that we are identified as being responsible for. And then, as Jerry Lynn did a great job of teasing as well, don't forget the April 4th date, which is not too far along, to have the conversation with them and OEdit about those three programs that she just did a great job of running through. So keep that in mind. Now, I don't want to lose track of the last part of this slide as you think about these upcoming opportunities, is we are working, and of course, Connor did a great job of walking you guys through our commitment layout, right? I'd love to get more feedback on that, but we are shooting to start our commitment window by May 1st, right? So we're going to try to get everything buttoned up after all this round of conversations we have. And by the way, the Dr. Cog meeting is this evening. Once we get through everybody and we think we've got it dialed in, and of course, we'll be communicating with our implementation partners who you've met here today. And once we're ready, then we're going to be shooting for May 1st to get that commitment window started. Now, the funding does not become available until July 1st, and hopefully sometime shortly after July 1st. But between May 1st and July 1st, right, and of course, you've got the November 1st deadline for commitments, we want you to start getting your commitments in sooner rather than later. So for those of you that will be chomping at the bit and ready, I hear you, Sheridan. You've reached out and you said you want to get cracking on this, which is awesome. We're going to be circling back with you here soon to have a meeting to discuss further. But if you can get your commitment in on or after May 1st, awesome, right? The funding is not going to be available until later, but at least you got that part of it done, right? And then as soon as the funding gets made available, then you're ready to roll. If you start to wait towards November 1st, for those of you that are interested, then of course, you're going to get, towards the back of the line for funding availability if people are ahead of you. So just something to think about. Just keep that in mind. So start looking for more communications as we get closer to May 1st to let you know that we're ready to roll. And then, of course, once funding is available and more funding program specificity becomes available, we'll keep you apprised of that as well, whether it be DOH, DLG, or EDIT and CHAFA. So that's all I've got for you folks. You've been fantastic. Apologies for going over by 5 minutes, but hopefully it's worth your time. Once again, this is recorded. It will be on our website for those that missed it or missed parts of it for you guys to revisit. And I will stop sharing now and we can end the recording. Talk to you guys soon and definitely hopefully see you on next Friday, March 20th.